Welcome to episode 2 of our Nurturing Your Buyer. So we've been exploring a range of different areas relating to lead nurturing and lead generation, and this is episode 2. So let's dive in and get started. So what's our plan for the next 60 minutes? Welcome and who's who, so we'll say hi. And looking at the 3 or 4 key areas. So why do we nurture leads? Really importantly, then who are we actually nurturing? Defining our campaign objective, and then looking at how the Eloqua campaign canvas and the multi-step campaign canvas specifically can help us design a pretty amazing customer experience. And of course, Q&A. And as you know, Q&A is something we'd love you to do throughout the session. So please don't hold till the end. Use the Q&A function. And on that point, as you know, our sessions are recorded using Zoom, and replays are available on our blog following the event, usually about a week later. Feel free to ask questions. As I said, use the Zoom Q&A function throughout that process. Anything you put in the Zoom Q&A is public, so you can upvote if somebody potentially asks the same question. If you'd rather ask a private question, you can do that as well using the chat function. And on that point, we have Adrian Jones, our CEO and founder, on the line to help us today with some of those questions, and also Sean, one of our business development managers. So thank you, Sean and Adrian, for your help. Adrian will also be helping us towards the end of this session to wrap up one of our topics as well. And my name is Derek Bell. I'm your host for today's session. So thank you for making some time to join us. So let's dive right in. So why do we nurture leads? It may seem super obvious, but there are ways we can nurture a whole range of different people based on different campaign objectives and what we're trying to do. What we're trying to focus on today, though, is prospects. So those people who are not yet clients or customers of yours, and we're trying to convert them, essentially. So this is all about the lead nurture specifically, not a general term, but a very specific term in this particular instance. So we want to look at ways we can enhance your relationship with the sales team, which is often a great byproduct of generating marketing qualified leads. So let's dive in. When we were putting some notes together for today's session, I had some comments written down, and Adrian decided to make some edits to that. So I thought I'm going to attribute this quote to him. So he says, in a complex selling environment, nurturing helps to keep your brand front and center as your prospect makes a buying decision, and supports those buyers through each step of their buyer's journey with timely and relevant content. So key points there. Keeping our brand front and center, that's one of the key objectives of a nurture campaign. And a nurture campaign typically happens over time. It's not something you send out on Thursday and that's it. That's not a nurture campaign. A nurture campaign is exactly that. It's nurturing a particular individual based on information that is hopefully timely and relevant, and supporting them in their decision to buy services or products from you. So that's why we want to do that, why we want to nurture. So Oracle has some other things to say, and I think these also add value as to the process. So the concept of problem-based marketing. So until we really understand the business problem that the person has, we can't really provide solutions necessarily. So we first of all need to make sure that they understand what it is that you do, so that they even conceive that you could possibly help them with their business problem. And that business problem may well be a B2B type of construct, or it could well be a high school student or a younger person looking to study at university, for example. Their problem is looking to get a degree, and they need a solution for that. And so what we're trying to do is present them with tools and ideas and suggestions to help to nurture them through that process. So as Oracle says there at the end, if done well, lead nurturing can really build strong brand loyalty long before the prospect is ready to buy. And so the point there being that when that decision or when that problem really surfaces, it becomes a pain point where they need to make a decision. The hopeful objective is that your brand is front of mind, that you're the brand that they think of as the organization who can potentially help solve their business problem. Now, some interesting comment here from McKinsey & Company as I was doing a little bit of background reading for today's session. I'd encourage you to have a look at this particular article if you just Google building next generation B2B sales capabilities. It's an article from March last year from McKinsey and Co. And they're talking here very much about the sales organization and being able to provide them with data-driven insights. So it says there, data-driven insights can also help leaders align and allocate coverage and resources more effectively, referring to the sales team. Now, you might ask, why am I talking about the sales team? Well, I'm talking about the sales team because where do you think a lot of those data-driven insights come from? A lot of them come from marketing, okay, and the information that you're able to gather. Now, there would be other insights you would assume from ERP platforms delivered into the CRM that would provide a more holistic view for the salesperson. But marketing has a critical role to play in getting that insight and passing that insight through to the CRM for the sales team. So along that note, I thought it's probably good to go back, take a step back, maybe go back to our university days at some of the basics of the messaging and a process. So the AIDA model is taught at universities around the world, and certainly in MBA programs, etc. And it basically walks you through a funnel and a process from awareness to interest, generating that interest. And there's a big part of what we obviously need to do from a marketing point of view as people work their way through that desire stage. So getting people to feel envious and having an emotional connection to the product or service. And it doesn't really matter if we're B2B or B2C, these principles are pretty universal. And taking action in our world, we'd say CTAs potentially, to be a little bit more specific. And then finally, the R is kind of added. Some people add the R, some don't. But retention, I think we'd all agree, retention from the point of view of upsell, cross-sell, etc., are all critical pieces. So if that's kind of the fundamental process, we then need to work out who we're actually nurturing. So the important part there is to define the moments that matter, that really help us understand how people are progressing through that process. Now, you may have a buyer's journey mapped out within your organization. You may have personas developed as well. And those two tools can be really helpful as you start to map out a process. Now, the key thing we see, so we spend quite a bit of time working with a range of different clients, looking from a marketing automation point of view and generally an Eloqua point of view around what they're doing from a lead nurture program. And so it starts off at the very beginning where we go through this process of defining the audience and understanding who we're talking about. And then very quickly, the question is like, well, what do we do with everybody that we've currently got in Eloqua? And so some of them will be halfway through nurture programs. Some will have been through nurture programs. Some may be ex-customers who maybe haven't purchased from you for a period of time. So you kind of end up then thinking about your nurture program in the context of two groups of people. Those that would in fact be net new additions to the lead nurture program once it goes live, but then you're kind of your installed base, those that are sitting in the Eloqua instance today. What we need to do is work out something that is relevant for that group collectively. But of course, we can utilize some things like dynamic content, etc., to be a little bit smarter about how we potentially address this initial group here, who may be heading through the new nurture program, having already been through a previous nurture program. I like to think about the start line. So the beginning, what does that start line look like? And how are we going to make that happen? So some questions to ask. Who qualifies? So, of course, let your strategy guide you is obviously the key thing. These are just some thought prompts for you to think about when you start to think about your lead nurture program and who qualifies. So who does qualify? What about past customers, as I said, or an ex-customer? What sort of criteria do you have? If they haven't purchased from you for 2 years, are they now an ex-customer, or do they go straight from being a customer back to being a prospect, for example? That knowledge of knowing that they have obviously previously engaged with you is pretty critical. And you may want to have communications reflect that somehow in the language. And of course, dynamic content can help you with that to make that a little bit unique for those people. We just need a data point to tell us that they were, in fact, a past customer. What about lost opportunity contacts? So these are contacts in the CRMs that are associated to a particular opportunity, but unfortunately has been lost at some point. So they probably have already been through a nurture campaign at some point. Do we recycle? Do we put them back into the process? I would suggest to you, yes, you do. But this time you probably know quite a bit more about them than you did the first time they went through, because in that selling process, hopefully the sales team were potentially gathering more information and potentially fleshing out that information at either the account level or the contact level within the CRM platform. From a university point of view, and this is quite interesting when you think about when an individual starts thinking about university to enrolling and then attending and then graduating, we could be talking 5, 6, 7, 8 years worth of time, even more potentially, depending on how early that student or prospective student gets engaged. So when you start thinking about nurture campaigns, think about our friends, our marketing friends in universities, and the length of some of those nurture campaigns. Now, the question obviously comes up then, well, how on earth do you have a nurture campaign that runs for 5 years? Look, you probably don't. You probably chunk that down into respective moments that matter potentially, or stages, typical stages that would be relevant for a high school student versus maybe they graduated high school, maybe they're taking a break, for instance, those sorts of things. There could be some hallmarks there to think about. But it's the same in any sort of protracted buying process, whether it's, maybe you sell equipment that requires millions of dollars of investment that's used in mining operations within the Arctic Circle. And those decisions are not made simply. They take time. And so if it's a complex selling environment, well, length of those nurture campaigns needs to be considered. Some common dilemmas that we find that people have here, and some considerations to think about, is for those contacts who are already in Eloqua. Okay, so if they're partway through an existing lead nurture, we need to make a decision as to what do we do. Do we sort of close off the current nurture program and just let those people flow through that are already in it, so let them complete that experience? Or do we simply deactivate that campaign and look at moving those people lock, stock, and barrel over to the new lead nurture campaign? Just needs to make a decision, that's all. So contacts who have completed, not competed, sorry, that should be completed, the current lead nurture, over what time frame? How long do we wait before we potentially put them into the new lead nurture program? What sort of time frame should we be waiting there? And then, of course, there's always those contacts that are literally just taking up hard disk space. There's zero engagement. They're not unsubscribing, but there's zero engagement. That's probably a different type of campaign, more of a reactivation campaign than potentially a lead nurture campaign. So something to think about there. So what I wanted to show you here was just an example of a reasonably basic sort of lead nurture campaign. But what we're looking at specifically is the starting point. So in this example, what we're saying is that net new individuals would be sitting here, and this would in turn be the ongoing segment that would feed your lead nurture campaign. This group over here may have been migrated from the current or the past lead nurture campaign that's being retired, for example. So that would be a one-off entry point over here, and we deliver sort of a bridging email, something to sort of create some context as to what they've just done and what they're about to go through potentially. And then everybody else, and they would flow through and fall into the regular campaign to receive the comms like everybody else. So that would be a pretty easy way that you could get people from point A to point B and have them flow through your new nurture campaign. If you now think about it from moving forward, it's now net new, and we've got loads of people that we want to try and funnel into the new lead nurture campaign. So what I'm trying to show here is just one example of how you might do that. So you may have a whole range of different campaigns that you've got running, doing all sorts of different things. And in those campaigns, you'll have different criteria that potentially qualifies the person to go into your nurture campaign. Now, it can be a little bit easier to actually funnel them through a single point. And so as a shared list can be a really easy way to do that. And so you can add people to a shared list from a campaign canvas. You can add people to a shared list via a form submission. You can create conditions on those in both scenarios. So there's a whole range of things. You can also manually upload people into a shared list as well. So the idea is we direct everybody to a single shared list, and you would probably call it the 2023 lead nurture campaign. We then take that shared list and we slip it into a segment, and that segment is then placed onto the canvas for your lead nurture campaign and essentially becomes your primary entry point for people to enter the campaign. So to show you how you might do that on a campaign canvas, you've possibly seen, hopefully maybe you've used this particular element on the campaign canvas. You can see it over here on the left-hand side. So here is just a really rudimentary example. We're saying if they've opened an email, drop them into the shared list. Now, of course, that can be as complex or as simple as you need it to be. It could be that they've performed a particular function, they've submitted a particular form, whatever the case may be. You can either do it here on the campaign canvas or you can do it in the form. But that would then push them into the primary lead nurture campaign. So on the form, in the processing steps is where you would add them to a shared list, as you can see here. Now, the upside of doing that is it's clean. You could also play around with program canvases. As in most things in Eloqua, there's often more than one way to do something. And as I said, this is just one way I'm suggesting you do it. But depending on the complexity of the campaigns you're running and how many you're running, the program canvas could be an alternative option as well to funnel people through, sort through different questions, and then either direct them to the lead nurture or not to the lead nurture, depending on whichever you want. Keeping in mind also at the form level, we can shoot people directly into the CRM platform. So while we're talking about the CRM, though, it's also worthwhile thinking about from the salesperson's point of view or those using the CRM platform, what if they wanted to add somebody to a particular nurture campaign? Is there a mechanism in place within the CRM platform where they can, for example, nominate an individual to be included into either the primary nurture or a specific type of nurture? Depending on the CRM platform that you're using, this can be quite simple. The easiest ways within, say, Salesforce CRM, for example, would be to set up a range of campaigns where people can simply add people as a campaign member, and they would simply flow through into the segment and onto the canvas. If you had fairly stable lead nurture campaigns that weren't changing like every 2 or 3 months, you could look at actually having checkboxes within the CRM platform, either on the lead object or something like that, where the individual can check a box and Eloqua can check for that every time it syncs. And if the checkbox is ticked and grabs that person, and it can drop them straight into a segment and straight into a campaign. So there are a range of ways to do it, but let's try and think about the CRM user and how they can get people into campaigns as well, versus them having to send you emails or send you an Excel spreadsheet or those sorts of things. Next step. So it's critical at this point that we now have some sort of clear objective in place. We've kind of thought a little bit about our audience, etc., but what is this campaign actually going to do? So clarity of purpose is a key thing. Now, it would be remiss of me if I didn't point out that we did some work for an Australian-based organization, but a global brand called Flight Centre Travel Group. And so Flight Centre, their Canadian and US team, spent quite some time with us around 2022, 2021 and 2022, building out a global lead nurture campaign for their corporate traveler side of the business. Kare, their VP of marketing, sort of outlines right in front of you. You can read it. I don't need to read it to you. But that was a pretty amazing process we went through with them. It was talking to teams across multiple geographies from the Americas, across Asia Pac, Europe and Africa, and working closely with those teams to have a global feel for what they were delivering, but with some local nuances. Came down to certain things in the way that the South African team wanted to communicate were a little bit different to the European team and a little bit different to the Australian team, etc. While the fundamentals were the same and the fundamental key messages were the same, there was little differences. And the other overlay to those points were personas. So utilizing personas to help in the building of that nurture campaign. If you'd like to know more about that process and what we did, Adrian would be the best person to talk to. He's on the line today. Thank you for rescuing me there when the power cut. But But yeah, we would love to talk to you further if that's something that is of interest to you and what you're trying to do. So, gaining clarity, what's your primary objective? So, obviously, marketing qualified leads is usually the number one desired outcome of any type of process to do with lead nurturing, but it's a very inward focus. Let's try and think from the customer's point of view or the prospect's point of view. What do they want to learn? What are they trying to discover? And what is it that we can do as a brand to help educate them in that process? So it comes down to we want to try and be really clear on what we're doing. So what is it that we're actually doing? Are we really just introducing a brand? Is it potentially the case that the people we're talking to have never heard of us before? They don't know our brand name. So we need to, first of all, get them to know our brand and try and assimilate that with the type of services or products that we offer. Or are we potentially looking at trying to explain a principle or an idea or a business problem and helping find solutions to those business problems? Or is it perhaps going a little bit more granular where we're drilling into a particular product or a service that is part of our brand that we deliver? Now, of course, it could be all three, by the way. It doesn't have to be one, two, or three. It could, in fact, be all three, just done over a period of time. The very principle of nurturing is the repetitive nature of information being delivered, but hopefully timely and relevant to the individual who's receiving it at the same time. So let's just be really clear on what it is we're trying to do. Now, while I talk about being clear, sometimes we can get a little bit too complex and dive a little bit too deep into certain parts of what we're trying to do. And that can often make it really hard. Okay, hard for the copywriters, hard for the team to build. And all of a sudden, what's felt reasonably simple can become very complex from an Eloqua build point of view. And it doesn't have to be that way. It can be a lot simpler. So let's try and keep it simple and help us communicate with the rest of your organization and those people who are contributing, i.e. copywriters, for example. And I see this quite often that there's just a disconnect between what marketing know Eloqua can do and then the way the copy is written and delivered to them. So much so that many marketers end up tweaking, editing, changing, etc. Whereas if perhaps the copywriter had a better understanding from the outset as to what actually could be delivered, then it might, in fact, alter the way they would write. And if they're a copywriter, that's their gig, right? That's what they do. So the more information we can give them, the better they will be. And it may come down to simple things like field merge. So they crystal clear that we can actually address people by name in communications. We can use their company name. If we have their country, we can drop that in. Any job titles, any information that's stored on the contact can be a field merge and custom objects, as you know. Dynamic content, the ability to present different images and combinations of copy with images to people as well is kind of critical for the copywriter to understand, so that, again, that could be tailored in that whole process. Digital body language is a harder one to convey potentially to the non-marketer, i.e. the copywriter. But the very fact that a person may be sent one email, two emails, three emails, and at that point they've opened nothing, but they've not unsubscribed. It's now the fourth time they've not opened anything. You know, if the copywriter is aware that we know that, is there a smarter way for us to potentially talk to that person? Again, let's try and get the whole team on board in the development of this process. So that really comes back to the start simple and expand from there. My point there is that sometimes it's very easy to get very bogged down in, okay, we have an audience, we have two audiences, and all of a sudden you've got 25 audiences, and all of a sudden what was one or two slightly different introduction emails become a very complex email with 25 different versions and multiplying that out, etc. So the key message there, keep it simple. Don't rush to make it super complex. Get it up and running and work on it from there. The other thing I would suggest to you is, and a nurture campaign by its very nature will have multiple forms of communication, and you may work out that there's 10 or 15 key messages, which in fact represent, potentially, 15 individual email assets. Now, the time to write and build 15 assets obviously takes time. But what may make sense is to launch the campaign in chunks, potentially. So let's take the first 5 And that becomes the first part of the lead nurture campaign. Then the second canvas can handle the next 5, and then the third canvas can handle the last 5. And if you think about a nurture as having maybe a few weeks in between each communication, or a week or so, then that just gives you more time to get up and running. You don't need to wait till you have everything ready in order to launch that particular campaign. So keep it simple. The next part of this exercise is to actually design the experience. So what is it going to look like? How are these emails going to be delivered? What sort of cadence are we looking at? Are we thinking of potentially altering the cadence of those emails? If some people are hyper engaged, do we actually want to work with them and potentially deliver the emails faster versus the non-responsive type of person? How do we work with them? Do we just keep the same flow, or do we maybe just pull back a little bit and slow down the delivery? We can do all of that on the campaign canvas. So having an understanding of that AIDA map that we saw before, a very rudimentary funnel concept, top to bottom, we know that journeys, buyer journeys today, are not as simple as a funnel for many, especially in the B2B, more complex environments. It just takes time. This is a very generic approach to a journey map that you've probably seen something similar, and you may even have something similar within your organization. But all of these things will help in the development of content and also help in the development of a nurture campaign. Also, when you're thinking about how long that nurture campaign should potentially go for. Okay, so is it a 3-month exercise? Is it a 12-month exercise? How long should it be? And what sort of cadence? Are we looking at every 3 weeks, every 2 weeks, every month and a half? What is the timeframes that we should be exploring? So translating something like that into a campaign canvas, we can initially start at a fairly rudimentary sort of top to bottom or left to right scenario, depending on how you like to build out your campaign canvases. But what I'm trying to illustrate here is that you may have a series of emails being delivered, but at some point here in maybe email 3, there's a question asked, and that question may trigger, it may help you understand which industry the person is in. And so depending on which industry they're in, you may then choose to reroute them ever so slightly. And so you can certainly go ahead and do that. And then again, you may do it again. And so depending on how you map this out, these could in fact be 3 different campaign canvases. And we're just simply using the move to campaign option to get people from the first stream to the second and the third. So the more information you're able to understand about a person, it may mean that you can then direct them off to a more tailored and more specific nurture campaign versus the core generic one that may just be a brand exercise initially. So a few ways to think about that. So as I was prepping for today's session, I just did a little bit of Googling around buyer maps and was curious to see what would come up. This is from Gartner, and I think you would agree, most people would agree, that's pretty complex. And if you think about that and how on earth you would support that from a nurture campaign point of view, that's a pretty valid question, I think. Look, I'm sure it can be done. The key thing would be underlying data. If there's underlying data to support all of that, well, that's fine. This one's from the corporate executive board. This one almost terrified me a little bit, but yeah, I mean, it's probably not too dissimilar to many of the complex buying processes that we see in a B2B environment. You sort of just scan for keywords and you're like, yep, procurement, yep, web searches, yep, overwhelming information about the problem following the independent online research. Yeah, it makes sense. This one I thought was interesting. It sort of focuses, yes, on the process, kind of a left to right scenario, but the swirly lines throughout kind of takes in that very multi-channel approach, those other digital touch points that happen. So search, digital billboards, landing pages, blogs, call center IVRs, etc., all sorts of different things. So yeah, other things to consider that can be triggers or information that could be brought back into Eloqua. This one caught my attention. It's a reasonably common concept of layout, very similar to the mock-up one that I showed you a few moments ago, but kind of breaking it into the key stages. The thing that this one does nicely is the activities and the feelings and needs potentially as well that are thrown in. So all of this helps you map out that journey to understand how you can better deliver a campaign canvas with that particular information. So at Marketing Cube, we do very similar process in relation to persona development. I suppose our key strength in this area is really understanding how marketing automation works and how Eloqua works specifically. CRM data often plays a really important part of that as well. But these, being able to develop these personas have greatly enhanced our ability to be able to look at from a content development point of view, even when it comes to an event and crafting an invitation, and we know who we're talking to, things like the think and feel type bullet points you see here and the pain points that you see under those bullet points, being able to kind of reflect on those as we craft messages for invitations or to blog updates. There are a whole range of different applications. But the use of those personas is really, really helpful. So this is something like this is what we did with the Flight Center team in the US and Canada. And we drink our own Kool-Aid. So this is a real live persona, Efficient Emma, that we use at Marketing Cube. All right, let's take a look at the campaign canvas. What I wanted to do here was just to give you a little bit of an idea as to some of the specific pieces or elements on the campaign canvas and what they can look like and how they can help you direct people and modify the journeys on the campaign. So that's the screenshot I shared with you earlier, looking at those different options with people to go through. But what I wanted to focus on was on this side. So let me just zoom in a bit there for you. But these elements can be really helpful. As you know, there are loads of elements to play with. But I just wanted to focus on these because I think these are the ones that potentially you will find information gets added to through a nurturing campaign, through form submissions, et cetera, and maybe CRM enriched data as well in that process. So what we're able to do here is access any of the information that is stored on the Eloqua contact. So if we look at industry, for example, it may be at the very early stages of your campaign, you don't know which industry the person is in, but you do have a series of very tailored and specific nurtures for your high value industries that you know that if we can get somebody from these 3 or 4 top industries, that's your sweet spot. That's where your service or your product does the best. So as soon as you know that information, we can potentially take them out of this nurturing campaign and move them into a more industry specific one. You could, of course, use dynamic content in this one to tailor it. Of course, yes, you could do that. It all depends on time and bandwidth and all those sorts of things. So what you could do there is once we know they're in the hot industry, is you could then move them off to a relevant campaign that speaks more specifically to that particular point. Just as you can access information on the contact, you can do exactly the same thing on a custom object. So you can access any of your custom objects, any of the relevant fields, and grab the information from there. So maybe in this example, we have identified that a particular individual is from New Zealand. We may not have known that in the very early stages of the campaign. Now I do know that. And so if that's the case, I can look at routing that person in a particular direction, or we can speak to them a little bit differently. Now that we know where they are, we can be clearer about the types of products or services that we offer potentially within that geography as well. So there are a couple of options here with move to campaign, move to program, add to campaign, and add to program. So this is a fairly common question I get asked by multiple users of Eloqua as well. What's the difference, move or add? The key difference when you look at it, if you look at the actual graphic here on the screen, you'll see that move is in fact a dead end. Okay, so I can't go out of the bottom of that one. Whereas, with the add, you can see I can come in at the top. I can come in at the top of that one and out at the bottom. So move to campaign means exactly that. It means that I'm going to take an individual and move them from this campaign to another campaign. So they're taken out. It becomes an exit point. They're out of this campaign and then moved to another campaign. Add to campaign means that they will in fact be added to another campaign, but they will now simultaneously be in both. So they'll remain in this particular campaign and will continue to go through the flow. However, they will also now simultaneously be added to a second campaign canvas where they will go off on their merry way and do whatever it is that you've set them to do. So that's the difference between move and add. Sending them off to a program can be helpful at different points. It's often more about data washing and cleaning and scrubbing of data in this particular context. Or it could be to push them into the CRM, but we can do that from here anyway. But yeah, so there can be a range of reasons as to why you might do that. So that's your move and add campaign. Now, this one here. So visited website, clicked email, and opened. So visited website is great, but keep in mind, as you can see from the interface, there's no way that you can actually identify what they've looked at on the website. So this is good at the very top of funnel, the very early stages of the buyer journey, where we don't know too much about them at this point. But the fact that they're actually going to the website, regardless of what they're looking at, that's a really positive sign. So that means you'll progress them in one of two directions, essentially. Clicked email also is helpful, obviously, but it doesn't give you a specific, right? It simply tells you that they've clicked. We know clicked is a much better level of engagement than opened, but it will get to a point in your campaign where it's not just that they have clicked, it's you want to know what they've actually clicked on. And if they've clicked on this, well, that means you then want to do this, okay? So that's where shared filters come in. But that last one there, opened email is, it's often referred to as the vanity metric, etc. But look, at the end of the day, it's an important part of the process. We need to know if they've opened. We know that Oracle have done some great work to help us understand that an open really is an open in the world of Apple and the privacy changes that have occurred. So it is a real open, which is good news. But let's have a look at this shared filter. So the key thing about the shared filter is that it enables you to ask a far more specific question. So the shared filter is built elsewhere within Eloqua. The interface is really much the same as building a segment, but it enables you to be very specific. So you can put in, if there are multiple pages on the website, we can put in the very specific links that you're looking at. So did they click on this one, or click on this one, or click on this one, or click on that one? Things like that can be added. In the context of emails, did they open this email or this one, or and, whatever the logic is that works for you. But the shared filter, once you start to get further into the campaign, often the shared filter will replace things like opened email. Like you don't even care if they opened or not. It's straight to the question, did they click on this? And well, if they clicked on it, well, obviously they opened it. If they didn't, well, they didn't click on it. Don't care if they opened it or not. Let's keep the journey going and keep the messaging going. So shared filters can really be a really important part of that exercise for you. Well, let's jump in to some final considerations. And Adrian, I will hand over to you to have a chat through some of these. Thank you.
Yeah, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about data governance, obviously a key element to nurturing and getting kind of nurtures underway, and then also analytics and reporting. So just thinking about data, I mean, when we talk about nurturing data and integration, it comes up time and time again as being kind of one of the key constraints for how customers run their lead nurture campaigns. So I'd sort of come up with a few things I think that are worth considering. The first goes back a little bit to those moments that matter, and it's really defining the data that matters. So whether you're trying to do more personalization with your nurture, or you're trying to do additional segmentation, pretty critical to define the data elements that you really need. And I think it's tempting when you start to look at integrations to try to get as much information as possible. But really, when you're looking at the customer journey or your buyer's journey, probably more important to focus on the data that you really need to drive the personalization that you're trying to drive. So that might be, how are you going to identify a decision maker, or how are you going to identify, I don't know, a new starter for internal communications? How are you going to identify a target industry or geography? And if the population of those fields, or you're not asking those questions on your initial contact forms, then you're not going to be able to get your nurture underway. So And as you go through your nurture, you can progressively profile and ask additional information. So sort of planning how you're going to get the data that you need through your nurture. Accelerate or move people unless you've got that next data point. So we need to think about that and plan that in advance. Another thing that's really helpful is a data dictionary. So one thing that we often find as well is that data is inconsistent. And so there might be multiple fields with very similar values, and aggregating and kind of pulling all that information, it gets really complicated, and people don't really remember often why they created the field in the first place. So a data dictionary can really help to find the purpose for the field, the value for the fields. It's a good place to cross-check before you create a new field. It's a good place to go back and refer to why the field was created. And so you can get consistency, and that means that your segmentation and your personalization is much easier to manage if you've got consistent data types for contacts, for lead status, for region, industry, all those sorts of things that can be a moving target. That can really help. And then the third component, I think, is CRM alignment, because one data point or some data points might end up relying on customer service or sales so that you can update the status of your nurture. So if somebody applies or someone buys something, or somebody talks to a salesperson and expresses an interest or changes their time horizon to purchase, you might want to change their nurture. So all of those things might then need to be fed back in, but they need to be fed back into you, as an Eloqua marketer, in a way that you can digest and use them. So essentially what we want to do is get that information coming back. So that might be call outcomes in a agreed format, or opportunity stage updates, or a sales update they might tick. I mean, we have a field simply within the CRM, which is a click to nurture. So those sort of contacts will get added into a nurture. So those sorts of mechanisms are really getting feedback from sales and service around how the nurture and the comm should go from here on in. So a few considerations around the data side. And then analytics and reporting is really about, for me, I think the first thing is aligning with the objectives and the KPIs. And I think right from the outset, you want to have that end in mind. What are the measurable objectives of your nurture? What is that you're setting out to achieve? And this may change over time, but that should also dictate how your reports and dashboards are set up and how you're going to measure the success and the changes in those KPIs. So one thing that's come a long way are the inside dashboards and reporting and the ability to customize them. We've built some super dashboards for customers that show exactly what's going on across their nurture campaigns, and how customers or how prospects are engaging, how different communications are working, and where content may need to be tweaked or updated or changed. So that's the first thing, is really aligning it with your original, with your primary objectives and KPIs. And the second thing I'd say to have a look at is who is needing to access your reports and dashboards, how frequently, and what are they looking for. So often we can design mega dashboards and mega reports, and everyone gets sort of so much information. They don't, and really prompts more questions, and they don't really get what they're looking for and come back and ask more questions. So I think if you can define the purpose for the reports and what people are really looking for, then we can put it more succinctly into a dashboard. Everyone can get the information automatically, and that should reduce the number of questions coming back to you to say, could you please drill into this and explain what happened? And then the last component I would say is, how are you going to capture and test insights? So quite often I see reports going out, questions coming back, and and the analysis of sort of one email is, we should definitely change this, and we need to change everything and adjust our whole nurture accordingly. So obviously one email doesn't necessarily mean, or one report might not necessarily mean that that's a fact. It might mean that it's a hypothesis, and something might need to change, and you might want to run some tests and include those tests over a kind of a number of campaigns, or maybe try changing one variable opposed to many variables at the same time. And once validated, have a way of updating your campaign process. I'd also say, if you have a forum somewhere, make a note for why you made that change, and what you were testing and what the result was, so that when you look back in the future, you'll be able to see why the change was made. And then if you're making a further change, you can refer back to that. So yeah, I think that's kind of reports and I guess some analytics and reporting sort of insights that hopefully you can take away with you and put into your processes.
The thing that I was thinking about from a dashboard point of view, obviously here we're talking about Eloqua and insight dashboards, but you asked a question about who the report is for. And so if the report is needed to be consumed by people outside of the marketing team, then maybe having those in Eloqua is not the right place. So we need to think about pushing that information into the CRM so the CRM reporting functionality can be also be used. And obviously we've done that for clients as well. Is that right?
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Yeah. And vice versa, if there's some CRM type data that you need in terms of, revenue or other things to help your marketing reports, then you can pull that through as well. So it's really about, working out where that report best sits. And then, who needs to get to that information.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Perfect.
All right. So the next thing, what's new, what's coming? Release 23C is due in August. Now, depending on where you are in the world and which pod of Eloqua your instance sits on, it'll happen for you in either the beginning or the middle of August. You can see the dates there for release 23C. Pod 1, many North American clients we find are on pod 1 or pod 4 for some reason. So pod 1, 4th of August, pod 4 around the middle of the month, something to look forward to. We don't have specific details yet, except that we know there'll be more Redwood functionalities. So the Redwood design experience will be expanded and pushed into additional areas of the platform. Which areas? We don't know that either just yet, but I believe there is a webinar with the US product team. For me in Australia, I think it's 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. my time. So I won't be attending that one live, but you'll be able to get more information then. As soon as we get it, we'll be sharing that through our blog and important update subscriptions as well. The other big thing I think from that last release we saw were those unsubscribe pages concept. So if you have a single click unsubscribe option in Eloqua, which quietly is something we'd never encourage any client to do. But if for some reason you have to do that, then the unsubscribe page is a great thing for you to look at, because what it does, it prevents bots essentially unsubscribing your audience before they even see your email, because those bots will go through, they're clicking on every single link to check for the validity of those links. And that includes your opt-out link. So, and if it's a single click opt-out, then they're gone. So this unsubscribe page puts a circuit breaker in between that, meaning that there's one more step for the person. It's no longer a single click. You may need to talk to legal counsel and figure out the best way to approach that. Now, there is something here that I was just uncovering and looking at the other day around Eloqua. So there, as you know, if you've been around Eloqua for a little while, you know this term GA, or general availability, of a range of different functions. Along with that is the controlled availability program. Now, the generally available list of optional is reasonably extensive. And I kind of wonder sometimes if this information gets buried and lost and people are not aware. So I won't be itemizing them here today, but I will take some of them into the blog post for this month, and we'll share some of the more common optional, generally available functions that are available for Eloqua users. So keep an eye out for that. There's some things there that you may well find of interest, and all you need to do is log a service request for the GA optional functions to have them turned on. It's quite simple. The controlled availability ones do require approval from an Eloqua product manager to access. But again, I'll itemize those for you so you can have a look at those as well. So what did we cover today and what did we talk about? Well, we decided to go through lead nurturing and really trying to understand the reasons why we do it, who we're talking to, having clarity around that purpose and objective of the lead nurture, and maybe multiple lead nurtures when we go into step 2 there and realize who that we're talking to. That may be applicable to have multiple nurtures in place, or smart use of dynamic content to tailor some of those messages a little bit more specifically. But a customer journey map and personas and reporting, all of those things tie together really well to help us build a much smarter and a much more effective nurture campaign. So in August, next month, episode 3 in our sort of 3-part series around lead nurturing, we'll be looking at lead scoring and engagement and understanding the importance of lead scoring, looking at key contact engagement and account retention, and then also account engagement in Eloqua and how you can look at that. The whole point of next month is really to then look at that whole handover point, taking the marketing qualified lead and handing it over to sales. So what is the criteria for that handover? How does that handover happen? What are the options? What are the various ways within Eloqua that we can get that information from Eloqua into the CRM platform, whether it's to a lead object or wherever else it may be. We look forward to seeing you next month. If you've already registered, we look forward to seeing you. If you have not registered, you will receive an invitation to register. So we'd love to see you there. We're a little bit early today. We've got a few minutes left. I'm happy to stay on the line here if there are any questions, but if not, thank you so much for making some time to join us this morning. We appreciate that. And we hope to see you in August. Thank you very much, everybody.